Welcome, our BrainWise friends, to our very first episode of what we are going to call, and it might evolve over time, but what we're calling right now neuroscience news with maybe a little of psychology sprinkled in. This is going to be a weekly mini episode, so miniature episode where we talk about all the things that are happening from a neuroscience perspective and the research that's being done, and just share updates with you. And then of course, as we always do, try to apply it to what it might look like in practice or how it might help us. And we'll be very upfront. Some of the research might just be simply research and very interesting information to know. Some of it will have applicability, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And Phil is our resident research expert and all things neuroscience expert. And so he's going to be taking us through a sequence of activities over the episode to talk about the information that he's seen. And then we'll both have conversation around how it might apply. And these episodes are designed to be very organic and very lighthearted, just talking about what's happening and giving you your kind of weekly digest. Maybe that'll be the name of it, our weekly Neuroscience Digest.
There we go.
I think we might have just come up with that in real time. So that might be what we call it, the Weekly Neuroscience Digest, powered by My BrainWise Coach. And of course, I'm called Bastian, and we are joined by our fabulous co-host, Phil Dixon. So Phil, dive in, tell us how are these episodes, these mini-sodes going to be structured, and then take it away with our first couple articles.
First of all, let me put some things in context. We know that in the US alone, there is over 100,000 neuroscience researchers, period. So if you think about them all producing, let's say, 1 or 2 papers a year, some of them are more prolific than that, then there's 200,000 or 300,000 papers produced every year. Of all that, there is actually a group called, there's a website, I think it's called Neuroscience News, that actually condenses all that. And I get about 5 or 6 papers a day sent to me as a result. And so my suggestion is for this is we use that. They're doing the research. They've got the latest data. So let's use what they do. And what I'm planning on doing is keeping an eye open over what happens over a week or 2 weeks and picking out some themes. So, for example, since you and I talked about this whenever it was, Wednesday, some of the themes that have come up, I've had 3 papers on sleep, the neuroscience of sleep. That's going to be the topic of our first one. What I'm planning on doing, these papers, when they come out, they're anywhere between 12 and 60 pages long. If you want, I'll read them all to you. But
maybe we'll call that bedtime stories.
There we go. But one of the good things about these papers is they start off with a summary or an abstract. And that gives you a little sense of what it's all about. And if it's a good summary, you can get most of it from the summary. So my plan is to take 3 of them and actually read out the relevant parts of the abstract so that you can get a sense. And then as we do that, then I'll comment on anything specific that comes up in the abstract that I think might be useful to explain. Then behind the scenes, what I'll do is I'll research some other papers that have come out in the last 2024, 2025, and see if there's anything that actually corroborates it or puts it into question. Because that's what science is about, is you work on a theory or a hypothesis that you think is true, and you run with it. It looks like it's true until data comes up that says it's not. And in my book and in everything I think we've said is we're working on the latest that we have. This time next week, next month, next year, we may learn something new. So that's the plan.
I love it. And we had talked earlier that there may be some articles or some topics that come up on our weekly Neuroscience Digest that maybe cause, I don't know, someone to feel a certain way or think a certain, there might be some more, I don't know what the word is, articles that probably cause some conversation, let's just say, that spark dialogue in either an interesting way or a more positive way. And we by no means are trying to sway one person to one side or the other or have any kind of, this is simply just our take on neuroscience and what's happening, really Phil's take on what's happening in the neuroscience field. And then my initial gut reaction to what I'm hearing. And then we'll have a dialogue around how does that show up in behavior if there is an applicability to that. So I think it's important to mention that, Phil, because We want folks that are listening to know that we're coming at a place of neutrality with this and really just helping people to digest what might be going on in the neuroscience world today.
I think there was a police television series where I forget the guy's name. He was just say, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And that's where we're trying to go. And let's look at the facts. Yeah. So I'm going to read the first one to you. And this is research have discovered that problems with the brain's waste clearing system, which is called the glymphatic system, may significantly raise the risk of developing dementia. In one of the largest studies to date, data from 40,000 adults revealed that the impaired cerebrospinal fluid flow predicts dementia risk years before symptoms appear.
Wow.
The findings show that cardiovascular issues like high blood pressure can damage this system, worsening toxin buildup in the brain, improving sleep quality, and managing blood pressure could help this system functioning and lower dementia risk. So let's talk about a couple of things there. First of all, they mentioned that there's data from 40,000 adults. One of the things that causes problem in the public interpretation of science is that somebody will do research and it'll be on 40 people. And that's not enough to project onto a wider population. Now, 40,000 is pretty well statistically, yes, if it's 40,000. Now, a good statistician might be able to pull that apart. But what we're looking for in the science world is a large number in what we call this cohort. So 40,000 qualifies to be pretty good research. Now, the manner in which the research was conducted, that can put another blanket over it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it mentions the waste clearing system. So let's talk about that for a moment. We thought for a long while, first of all, the question is, why do we sleep? Because after all, if you go back from an evolutionary point of view, sleep is not a good thing to do because it's the most vulnerable you're likely to be. If you're asleep and that saber-toothed tiger comes around, then you're at a disadvantage, let's put it that way. And sleep in itself, we have to say there's got to be a good reason for it from an evolutionary point of view. And one is that we think that sleep enables the brain to sort out what's happened during the day. So we've talked in earlier podcasts about the fact that we look for threat, we look for reward, the rest is neutral. So in sleep, what it seems is we throw away those neutral memories. There's not a lot of point in keeping the memory of the fact that you put a cube of sugar in your coffee that morning. It's not going to help you. But threats and rewards do help. Turns out, by the way, when we're under stress, we tend only to remember the threats. And again, evolutionary point of view would say, yep, that's a good idea. So we're now over the last 10 or 15 years of research that what also happens during good, deep sleep is that the gaps between the neurons expand slightly so that it can get flushed out with what they call the glymphatic system. So it flushes out all the detritus of the day, all those byproducts of your brain using up glucose and oxygen, they all get flushed away. And that's goodness. If anyone's ever been to Paris overnight, that's what they do to the streets of Paris. They flush it away and clean it up. So anything that gets in the way of that is likely to cause trouble. It will cause a plaque buildup, basically. That has been correlated with dementia. So what they're basically saying is that it looks like getting better sleep will reduce dementia risk. That's the bottom line of that.
We'll talk about towards the end, what are some ways that we might suggest from a BrainWise perspective to get better sleep. But before we dive into that, I think you've got a couple more to go through.
Yeah. So that one's very applicable. You can turn around and say, yes, we don't want to get dementia, therefore do some of the things. When nothing gets guaranteed, but at least it might reduce the risk. This one is more on hey, this is interesting. New brain imaging research has uncovered how the brain's energy and activity reorganize as it transitions from wakefulness to deep REM sleep. As we go into REM sleep, scientists found that while cognitive regions quiet down, sensory and motor areas stay active, keeping the brain responsive to the environment. So it's not the whole brain. In fact, one of the things we do know about sleep is that during sleep, the brain is just as active as it is during the day. It's just doing different things. Blood flow and cerebrospinal fluid dynamics also shift, supporting the theory that sleep helps clear metabolic waste from the brain. So again, we're getting another paper that supports get sleep, you're less likely to get damage. The findings offer fresh insight into how sleep maintains both restoration and environmental awareness. So what it means is that when you go into deep REM sleep, we have this sense that you're checked out. But in actual fact, you're checked out from a cognitive aspect, but part of your brain is responding to the sensory and the motor things that might be. And it probably starts to explain why we twitch and we start talking and some of those other things that are going on, which don't make any sense to somebody, well, don't make any sense to the sleeper or even the observer. So
or when we're falling in the middle of our dream. Have you ever had that film?
That's absolutely right. In fact, that's on a great movie, Inception. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes.
Wonderful movie for anybody who's interested in what goes on in the brain. So that's, again, reinforces get some good sleep. And what I researched in support of this is what do we mean by good sleep? So we're going to be coming to some papers on that in a moment.
Perfect.
So this is the one that might upset a couple of people. Just heads up. Teenagers who sleep less or experience frequent night awakenings are significantly more likely to attempt suicide later in adolescence, according to a major longitudinal study. When we say longitudinal study, that means a study that goes out over time.
Yeah.
Research analyzed data from more than 8,500 teens, again, statistically significant, and found that poor sleep at the age of 14 predicted suicide attempts by age 17, even after accounting for other mental health risk factors.
Wow.
This study revealed that shorter sleep duration and fragmented sleep were stronger predictors than depressive symptoms. So something we should be looking at. Depression, we know, is linked to suicide at a later point in time, but this says bad sleep can be as well. Improving sleep patterns in teens could therefore serve as a crucial and practical target for suicide prevention. So all of these things are coming up about what do we want to do to get an ideal number of sleep. So let's talk about that for a moment, unless there's anything you want to add en route.
No, I think it's perfect. Let's define what good sleep looks like.
All right. So this one comes from a journal called The Nature and Science of Sleep. I thought that might be useful to look at. And here, however, the ideal amount of sleep required each night can vary between individuals due to genetic factors and other reasons. And it's important to adapt our recommendations on a case-by-case basis. So this is a really good example of one size does not fit all. Sleep duration recommendations, the public health approach, are well suited to provide guidance at the population level. Advice at the individual level, e.g. in a clinic, should be individualized to the reality of each person. Right. A general valid assumption is that individuals obtain the right amount of sleep if they wake up feeling well rested and perform well during the day. Period. Okay. That's the measure. All right. Beyond
success, right?
Beyond sleep quantity, other important sleep characteristics should be considered, such as sleep quality and sleep timing, bedtime and wake-up time. In conclusion, the important inter-individual variability in sleep needs across the life cycle implies that there's no magic number for the ideal duration of sleep. So we've all been told, at least when I grew up, you need 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah, 7 to 8 is what I've always heard.
Sleep, and I love this summary of this. Sleep is not a waste of time and should receive the level of attention the same as nutrition and exercise in the package for good health.
Which I think you see that coming up in society because you've got the Apple Watch or the Fitbit or the Samsung Watch or what. A big part of, at least I know Fitbit specifically, was measuring sleep. And they actually give you a sleep score. So connected to it is your activity level, your nutrition level, your caloric intake. You can also look at the macros, all of that. But then there's a big part around sleep. And when do you get into REM sleep? And they actually give you a score. Actually, a mutual colleague of ours was talking about that and how she actually wears it to bed and tries to see where her sleep score is. So I think societally, we're beginning to really understand that it's probably always been somewhat accepted that sleep was important, but it was probably a bit more rosy in nature than it is now, where it's a bit more scientific.
Yeah. So this one is, and I won't read all of this out, I'm going to read out the conclusion. It says, both short and long sleep duration are associated with an increased risk of all-cause mortality with a U-shaped dose-response relationship. It is imperative to implement appropriate primary prevention strategies aimed at monitoring and providing health education to population at risk of developing unhealthy sleep patterns. Oh my God, what does all that mean? It basically means if you get too much sleep, it can damage you. And if you get too little sleep, it can damage you.
So balance in this
So
case.
you need, it's an individual balance. And identifying what that is for you is critical. There is, in amongst the sleep researchers, there's actually two big schools of thought. One that says it's plus or minus 8 hours. And the other says, no, it's individualistic, up to you. It can be anywhere from 6 to 10. And it depends on who you want to believe. But finding out what's personalized for you is important.
And I think a way to do that is to, if you do track your sleep, or if it's using a watch, or maybe you're writing it down, is over a number of days, when you feel most rested, how many hours of sleep did you get? And I think the other part too is it's not always just hours, Phil, either. It's the type of sleep that one gets into. And there's a couple of things that I think we should talk about, like the TV use, phone usage. What are some recommendations? Because I know that a lot of people, for myself anyways, we have the TV on when we fall asleep at night. And one of the things they always recommend is if you have to have something on the TV, which they prefer you don't, because the light, all of those things, the noise can disrupt sleep, but choose something without a laugh track in it, which is an interesting notion, which basically means people aren't laughing through it. It's more of like a kind of monotone type experience on the television. But there's different things that are given out to help people that we can talk about on our podcast here. How do you actually help prepare yourself to get even better sleep? The gut is certainly a big part of it. What you're eating before you go to bed, what are you doing with exercise? All those things play into it because we're such interconnected beings. But I do know the laugh track. I do know no TV. And then the phone, I think we should reserve a couple minutes to talk about that, because that's a very recent introduction into all of our experiences. And it can play a significant role on people's ability to get good sleep.
Yeah. Other than the bedside lamp, people say don't have any technology with an off switch.
Yeah.
And that's a good rule of thumb. Leave them outside. Right. The other thing, if you are going to fall asleep to music, there's certain parts of music which to the ear and to the brain stimulate the human voice. And I do remember that saxophone and guitar resonate in the human brain exactly the same way as a human voice. And if we get a human voice when we're asleep, we're going to start to wake up and pay attention to it. Yeah. Another one, I'll give you this basic, are we getting enough sleep? And what they found is that only 15% of participants got what seemed to be the correct amount of sleep for them each night. So that's 1 in 6 of us getting the correct amount of sleep for them. This is not based on the overall averages and things like that. Then the other thing is be careful, because average can drive you crazy. Because you can have an average of 7 hours sleep at night and sleep 7 hours every night. You can also get an average of 11 hours sleep a night by 10 hours and 3 hours and 10 hours and 4 hours. So be careful of using average. What's the extremes as well. A significant number of adolescents experience sleepiness, primarily due to sleep deprivation. The detrimental effects of inadequate sleep on both physical and mental health are well documented, particularly during adolescence, a critical development stage that has far-reaching implications for later life outcomes. Just another warning, but this was something I didn't realize. The International Classification of Diseases 11th revision, that's the big thick book that psychiatrists and psychologists use, recently introduced the disorder termed insufficient sleep syndrome, characterized by a persistent reduction in sleep quantity and quality. It's now actually being organized as a deficiency for us.
Right.
So that's a summary of the data. By no means is it all inclusive or anything, but I just wanted to have this as our first conversation about the neuroscience of sleep and the importance of finding out, number one, what is your optimal amount? And number two, how can you get to that optimal amount? Number three, how can you ensure that not just the quantity, but the quality is good, and that it's a fairly consistent time when you go to bed and when you wake up. So those seem to be the parameters. And I've spent a bit more time on the adolescent side of it, but it's equally important as you go through your whole lifespan.
I think as you look at how do you set yourself up to have great sleep, one of the things that has become a common topic, especially from a psychological perspective, is your phone, leaving it outside the bedroom if it's at all possible. I know a lot of people say I use it as my alarm clock. Well, let's get a different one. They still have the old analog ones, I think, that exist that you can set. There's a recommendation to not use it up to an hour before actually going to bed, so that you're not, because we've talked a little bit, Phil, on our podcast, that the phone creates an addictive effect because you're looking for the next notification. Is someone reaching out to me? Am I needed? Am I wanted? Whatever it is. So dopamine is being released each time that happens. And so there's this draw to it. But if we can disconnect far enough out from going to bed, it'll be easier to fall asleep. And then they say you're going to get better sleep overall. And then I think the other thing for those who are in committed relationships or spousal relationships, one of the things that they recommend a lot of times is if you can, it doesn't always work this way, but if you can time it so that you go to sleep around the same time as your partner, for a variety of reasons that we are not going to talk about on this podcast. But I think one of them is that if you stay in sync, it allows some research that indicates that you actually get better sleep when you go to sleep around the same time as your partner. And there's a variety of reasons for that. If you have questions, reach out to us we might get kicked off the air if we talk about some of them, Phil. So we'll just say, reach out to us at questions at My BrainWise Coach if you want to know more about that in particular. But there is a lot of correlation there for those who are married or have a significant other that they go to bed with.
Yeah.
If you have any questions or if you have any specific topics that you would like to go through specifically around what's happening in neuroscience today, reach out as always to questions at mybrainwisecoach.com. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget, right now we're running a contest because we reached 500 subscribers on YouTube, which is a celebratory moment, round of applause for all of us in our BrainWise community. So take a screenshot of you being subscribed to our YouTube channel. Take a screenshot of you sharing our YouTube channel with one or more people. Send it to the email questions at mybrainwisecoach.com because we're giving 5 lucky BrainWise friends a copy of Phil's book and a $10 gift card. And until next time, stay compassionate, stay curious, and always stay BrainWise.